Well, it's been, a while since one of these, hasn't it? Listen, I was doing something very important in all this downtime. Yeah, I'm gonna kill myself. Anyways, enough about my life. Let's talk about something way more exciting. Fighting games, specifically Guilty Gear Strive. Strive is no stranger to controversy. Some reasonable, some not, but one has been a thorn in Strive's sides for years. In Season 2, Strive sees the return of Bridget. Not only would it be her glorious return, but a new story as well. Strive sees Bridget come out as trans, and that's caused quite the show. This initially caused weeks of back and forth, so much so that the creators of Guilty Gear, Daisuke Ishiwatari, along with the lead producer of Strive, Akira Kitano, released a statement essentially saying, "She's a girl now, please shut up," and that's the end. Right? Fast forward a bit, and Dimitri Monroe happened. What is a Dimitri Monroe, you ask? Dimitri Monroe is a YouTuber who covers many topics, usually related to the gaming and anime community. In June of 2023, Dimitri uploaded a video titled Guilty Gear XY, Bridget Retcon Investigated, in which he analyzes Bridget's new story and the events that surrounded it in an attempt to find out just what happened. Now, this isn't his first rodeo with Bridget, as around August to September in 2022, he made a video going over the change. How was that one? He went back and edited the title and video like 20 times before priving it. So I'm going to take an educated guess here and tell you that it was not good. But is the new one good? Well, as you can see by the existence of this video, I think it's the greatest video ever made. I'm going to explain to you why you should watch it every day until the heat death of the universe. Huh. How did that get there? Yeah, this vid is flawed, to say nicely. Now, let's address the elephant in the room here. The Dimitri video is pretty old, and I know by the time this video comes out, it's going to be even older, so why even make it now? Well, let me explain my backstory for this vid. I initially watched Dimitri's vid a couple of months after it came out, and I thought it was alright. It had some of the issues I had with his first Bridget video, but there were some improvements and even points I thought I agreed with, so I decided to just let it be. But as time passed on, I saw many of the same people repeating points that were obviously from Dimitri's video, but they just sucked. Maybe it was a case of them leaving out many of the points Dimitri made, or maybe it was something deeper. So I rewatched the video with a more vigilant eye and realized just how wrong Dimitri was here. So that's one of the reasons why this video is so late. But don't worry, I haven't seen anything from Dimitri that would make me believe that he doesn't still stand by his video anymore. I mean, the fact that the title has been changed into something like Guilty Gear XY, the Bridget Retcon Investigated 2.1 Final Remix featuring Dante from the DMC series, like his previous video was, should probably be evidence enough. But he's made tweets or zeets related to Strive that should still be evidence enough that he's still not the biggest fan of the game by briefly stated in this video. So I still believe that he stands by most of everything ahead in this video, just to make it fair to critique. But hey, let's ignore that for a second. Let's say that Dimitri secretly hates his video and the urge to send it to the wood chipper whispers to him like the Green Goblin mask. Well, like I said earlier, many of the arguments Dimitri makes have been adopted, if not inspired, by many of the same people who dislike Strive Bridget. I find it worthwhile to go through the video as it acts as an epic compilation of everything wrong with these beliefs and why they are fundamentally flawed at their core. Also, not to foreshadow any future points that might appear at the end of the video or anything, but the reason Dimitri edited his first video on Bridget was, well, in his own words, due to misinformation. As the Strive devs released their statements during that bit's time, he decided to go back and edit things that might make it seem a little off. Now, despite doing all that, said video still contains misinformation like the arcade modes having bad ends or that Akira Kitano sold Guilty Gear from Daisuke, even though Kitano worked on a previous Guilty Gear game, Guilty Gear XR, and it's been fairly obvious that Daisuke has been involved in Strive ever since we first heard about the game. He was in interviews. So I firmly believe that if Dimitri did disown his current video, I don't think he would ever really be honest with the reasons why he did that. So that should cover all my bases, so grab something to eat and a drink while we're at it. Let's start this thing.
And we'll be talking about this in more detail soon, but what we really want to focus on first is the uncertain nature in the middle that caused this, as that was by design. That's not speculation on my part either, far from it. While the developer's backyard and other subsequent interviews, such as the late October birthday interviews with Kantano and Daisuke, stated this was always the plan for Bridget's character, thus resulting in many pointing to prior interviews and other past information that said otherwise, most of which we've already covered. It's the sentiment, an even clearer farce. See, in that late October TBS interview that no one actually read, Kantano would say the original intention was for Bridget's identity to be ambiguous, stating that even if the team had their own views of the scene prior to this, it was left for the audience to decide.
Now before I start to unravel all this, I'm going to play this section from the beginning of the video, as is relevant here.
Video covering the situation, we've seen interviews from the devs confirming their intent with said character's identity, then going back on that, and saying it was meant to be ambiguous initially, stating they changed their mind due to the reaction, to then going back on that, presenting trans Bridget was always the plan.
This isn't a contradiction. Nowhere in the second statement do they mention making the story ambiguous. The keyword here is in the second part of Kitano's statement, even if others disagree and come to their own conclusion. What Kitano is essentially saying is, we knew that people would be upset, but we hope that they would make their conclusions after understanding the story and why the team did what they did, even if they may disagree with the message. This is even more obvious in the first part of his statement, where he admits that he knew that people would be upset about their decision. It's weird to anticipate backlash for something that they went out of their way to be vague about, unless they were actually very certain about their message. But don't just take my word for it. In that same quote, which, by the way, you cut this part out for some reason, Kitano goes into more detail about how, despite the story's length, they still wanted to get their message across about Bridget, her life, and her actions. They seem to have put a lot of work into making Bridget's actions very clear, which would seem odd if they actually wanted to make her story vague and ambiguous.
He's the side they initially made the change for, when they were called out for it. As, make no mistake, these same interviews have Daisuke mentioning the change was done to be conscious of the overseas market and a strong awareness to global compliance.
Overseas compliance isn't why they changed the character. I don't think that's the case, and you shouldn't either. After all, in the same article, there are multiple statements from Daisuke that have him state that he and the team wouldn't alter or change a character due to global compliance. Here, Daisuke brings up how the marketing said Baiken wouldn't pass due to her missing limbs. So if global compliance is so strong that they would be forced to change something to appease the West, obviously, wait, this bit doesn't work. You show footage of Baiken in Strive still being her limbless self. So no, I would say Bridget being trans has nothing to do with the global compliance thing, or you found very little evidence to support that. Heck, in your screenshot, he literally says it wasn't due to compliance and talked about this same thing. And wait a minute, are you taking this one example out of context while ignoring the factual evidence? There's a name for that, right?
Cherry picking.
Ah, thanks! You're cherry picking!
Then there's Ozawa, the marketing director, who is also frequently quoted for the trans Bridget narrative. Interestingly, he had this to say in a stream on August 9th. I might as well bring it up. Japan is not used to it yet, the whole gender topic. You might as well learn about it, or maybe you don't really need to learn. But I think it's important to understand. The Guilty Gear tournament winner in 2022 was trans, right? I found out about it on Twitter. This is the first time I learned about the trans flag. I already knew about the rainbow flag, but this is the first time with the trans symbol. So when everyone who's involved with the claim that this was apparently in the works since 2002 seemingly has statements showing how foreign the very concept of Bridget's new identity was a week to 2 years prior, is it really any surprise that we got the interpretation given?
This does seem pretty bad. For devs for a trans character while barely knowing things like trans rights, that makes him seem incredibly shallow at best. That is until I realized something. Since Dimitri's covering Daisuke's inconsistencies, let's flip the script and talk about his. After doing some digging, and by that I mean watching the video made right before this one, something caught my eye, mainly this part.
In March of 2022, there was a trans pride parade in Tokyo. However, when you look at the parade itself, something should immediately stand out to you, other than the minuscule size. Nearly all of the signs are in English, with English slogans like smash the binary system, Antifa flags, and many other things that seem odd for the generally ethnically homogenized Japan. I'm not saying everyone here is a foreigner, but there are a lot of strokes of white washing over this crowd. It should come as no surprise when I say this was mostly set up and bankrolled by English speakers, promoted by Americans, and talked about by Americans. For the people who often talk about colonization, and how bad their ancestors are for forcing their culture on others, that's what these people are doing, because they don't actually
Mention that this parade consisted of American slogans and signs, and would you look at that, it's a trans flag and slogans like trans rights. In your own words, these are primarily American things, and phrases that don't exist in Japan or aren't common ways that Japanese trans people express themselves. But you also argue that the absence of these phrases don't mean that trans or gay Japanese people don't exist. So then, between this and your comment from earlier,
you consider just 2 years ago, Daisuke, the one supposedly claiming the character had always been trans, is quoted as saying he didn't even know what transgender was, when asked by a Twitter user to write trans rights on an image of Bridget at the time. An image people now use as a direct lie to push the Bridget was always trans narrative, as it's claimed it was made completely of his own volition, back then, despite literally not knowing what he was writing.
Why are we even questioning their confusion? Daisuke has a reason to not know what trans right meant, as it's not something that Japanese people use. In fact, that point looks really bad now. You're arguing that a Japanese man that requires a translator not understanding an English phrase means that he doesn't know the concept. No. It means that he doesn't speak English and that you should expect that to happen. But this inconsistency actually hurts both this video and the previous one, as what Ozawa said actually supports that old point. He confirmed that Japan doesn't use the flags, showing just how Americanized that protest was. But now you're saying that he's wrong. So what, did you just make up that part of globalizing Japan? I sure hope not, because that would mean you just decided to spotlight and harass a random group of people while accusing them of colonizing a country while knowing nothing about said country and its culture in a video claiming others are doing the exact same thing. That or you're a massive liar.
The same sentiment can be found later in the TBS interview, where it's discussed how Bridget has the transgender symbol on their outfit. I brought attention to this in my original video, but to reiterate, the symbol on Bridget's current headpiece actually stands for androgynous. The transgender symbol is a completely different design. In fact, this specific variant of the androgyne symbol actually means male appearance, meaning it makes even less sense to put it on a transgender female.
So you know how earlier I brought up that Dimitri previously argued that Japan handles trans stuff differently than us filthy Americans? This is yet another instance of that. See, technically Dimitri's right. In all my research, most definitions of androgyne are similar to how the West describes it, but here's what he's leaving out. Since he's established that Japan doesn't have the same clearly defined or agreed upon trans symbols that we do, but in Japan, androgyne is considered part of the trans umbrella. So, the androgyne symbol could be considered a trans symbol. Dimitri will later go on to argue just how prevalent trans characters are in Japanese media, but he never shows how they're portrayed, what symbols and portrayals are used with them. Well, all one of them. Dimitri doesn't provide any proof that Bridget's use of the androgyne symbol would be wrong for a Japanese character. I'd even go to the extent of arguing that since the trans character he does show don't use a trans flag or any of the stuff similar to it, it would show that it's not nearly as common in Japan as he would like you to believe. I'd also like to point out that in my research, in most of the articles, despite most of them talking about trans people or gender-related topics, the trans flag isn't used. Only the gay one. Now remember when Ozawa said that the only flag he was previously familiar with was the gay flag? Strange how the more you look into it, there's more proof that the stuff that Western trans people use isn't as widespread in Japan as Dimitri would have you believe, except for when he now wants you to. The symbol isn't used in a wrong manner, and maybe a certain someone should stop with all the Japanese perspective stuff when you clearly don't want to apply it to the actual Japanese developers. Also, didn't a certain someone also once say that forcing a Western belief on Japanese people's colonization? A little unrelated, but you know that Dimitri is both white and Italian.
But it should not at all be shocking to hear he didn't create every aspect of these games, maybe even less than you think in some areas. The original artist responsible for designing Bridget is Emiko Iwasaki, who would get her start working in the industry by way of this very series, before unfortunately leaving Arc System in 2011 due to the sexist treatment she received within the company. She was even responsible for Battle Fantasia, the very first Arc System game, to utilize the 2.5D technology that has become synonymous with the company. She's certainly someone worth recognizing in relation to both this character and Arc System's success, and one can only wonder why her name has been buried in relation to both.
Nowhere in any of the articles you mentioned is Emiko solely credited for creating Bridget. The sources you show in the video list both her and Daisuke as being behind the design of the character, which, by the way, the same character list is shared on Daisuke's Wikipedia page, just to further show how iffy this point is. Now, as a gamer, I do appreciate the yellow highlighting to show the info, but said info doesn't denote who created who. And using Dimitri's logic, Emiko somehow created Kai, Milia, Faust, and Soul, despite every source, including the same Wikipedia page, showing that she only started working with Guilty Gear around Guilty Gear Petite, and all of those characters debuted in the original Guilty Gear on the PS1. Now, in between both Dimitri's and this video, the page was updated and the character list was changed, but his point is still bad, and the claim that Emiko's the character designer is still pretty weak, as the characters in now list are characters like Baiken and Testament, who were in the original Guilty Gear that Emiko didn't work on. There is one character who's in a game that Emiko worked on, Dizzy, which was Guilty Gear X, except that she only worked on the Game Boy Advance version of that game, which came out 2 years after the original arcade release. Now, you wanna know who's the character designer for the original release of Guilty Gear X? Daisuke Ishiwatari. Looking deeper, Emiko is credited for doing illustrations and character art, think splash art in the character select screen, but nothing to do with the character design in GGX2 or XX. Meanwhile, Daisuke is credited with doing character designs in the arcade release of X2, where Bridget is from. Emiko is only credited for doing the ending illustrations in that game. When Emiko is the character designer, she's credited. Take Battle Fantasia, for example. Now, all of this is to downplay her. I believe video games suffer a lot from, OMG, this guy did all the work for this game. All games are a collaborative effort, and everybody deserves to have their flowers, and Emiko, she's an amazing artist, and while I may disagree with everything in this video, you are right in that her name shouldn't be buried. But based on the actual sources, Emiko really didn't have a big hand in the creation of Bridget, or at least so much influence that you can completely disregard Daisuke's involvement. I may agree that her name shouldn't be buried, but going the exact opposite direction isn't the solution here.
For Bridget, whereas Norimitsu Kaiho is credited for the character's actual writing. And I was originally planning to end this section by saying he had no small part in the creation of the character. It was a collaborative effort that he surely signed off on and was involved within the process. But that was something I wrote before research began. I don't think that's fully true now. I believe it really was minuscule. As do you want to know who is now seemingly aiming to discredit Daisuke's involvement? Well, Daisuke himself. In a 4Gamer interview, Daisuke went on record to clarify that he had nothing to do with Bridget's previous writing, seeming to want to disconnect himself from an aspect of prior games, despite previous statements contradicting such a sentiment.
So, is this supposed to be the proof for earlier? It's bad. So, did Daisuke really have little involvement in making Bridget? Let's start with the first part of his statement. He says he hasn't touched writing for the home port for XX. This is important as Guilty Gear XX first released in arcades. Yorimizu Kaiho didn't join until the home/console ports, as your own footage confirms. Here's a question. How is Kaiho going to be responsible for creating Bridget when he didn't even work on X2 until 6 months after she was created? She was just added in a later re-release like Akuma and Street Fighter 3. Meanwhile, Daisuke has been involved in making the character from the very start, as not only from the anime explanation from earlier, not only from actual sources, but in the same article you brought up in the last segment, Daisuke talks about where he got the idea from Bridget from. Shame you cut that part of the interview out. Weird how that keeps happening, huh? Daisuke did have a role in creating Bridget, the character, and probably the concepts for her story, while the main story was written by Kaiho. So in a way, your earlier claim that it was a collaborative effort was true, just not in the way you wanted it to be. But I think there's more at play here. See, I will discuss the rest of Daisuke's statement as it makes your previous claims that he suddenly doesn't want to be credited and the inconsistencies a lot more shaky. First, Daisuke didn't want to be credited with the home ports of XX, but not XX as a whole, and there's a reason for this. Daisuke states that he did have a story in mind, but it was physically impossible to make the story as he envisioned, so he asked artists to stop. They didn't, and we got the X2 story. Saying he had no involvement with the story is true, but is definitely leaving some stuff out, as he did have something in mind, but corporate does as corporate do, and squash his vision. So it's a little murky to say things like Bridget being trans weren't planned at some point. Hopefully you'll at least acknowledge this and won't ignore this, right?
A coward who was only willing to enact this wish once it was guaranteed to print money.
Well, that's embarrassing. Hopefully you don't go on a tangent about how terrible it is when corporations ruin someone's creative vision, because that would suck.
Like many others, I've always been a big fan of Pokemon, but it's a series that holds the tale of Takashi Shudo, a Japanese scriptwriter and novelist who was the original creator of Lugia. Shudo originally envisioned Lugia as a motherly figure, heavily connected to life on Earth itself, and as such designed a creature with female characteristics and personality, while still attempting to represent both genders to give the creature an air of androgyny. However, when it came time for the Pokemon's movie appearance, much of this was changed. Shudo only found out from a commercial, in fact, and can be quoted as feeling like he wanted to die, proceeding to turn to drugs and alcohol as crutches in the coming years. Lamenting such regrets of letting this happen to a character he had initially poured so much love into, and wishing he could have fought harder for his vision, a sentiment held right up until his death.
So that's what you're doing. It's bad when companies get in the way of someone's work, except for when it happens to Daisuke. Then it's fair, and he wasn't even the real creator anyway because Dimitri can't read. Nice double standards there. By the way, in the same interview, Daisuke makes the claim that he never changed the story, that this is what he always wanted to happen in some way. The same claim he's making right now, so while you can disagree with certain things, this isn't some random thing he suddenly started saying. He said this even before Bridget was added or changed. Now, allow me to step away from this point and go off the rails for a bit. I want to talk about the research you did and, more importantly, how that info is presented to the viewer. This will be important, I swear. I've been showing various times where Dimitri cut out statements from articles, but this goes way deeper than you think. I want to bring up this bit from earlier.
We've seen interviews from the devs confirming their intent with said character's identity, then going back on that, and saying it was meant to be ambiguous initially, stating they changed their mind due to the reaction, to then going back on that, presenting trans Bridget was always the plan.
This is framed as Daisuke and the crew constantly changing their reasons, but guess what? This statement comes from an Anime News Network or an interview, which I just noticed that you can't even see the site's name here or for any site that he decides to just show the title of. Great sourcing there. But going back to said interview, Dimitri cut something massive out of this. Namely, their interview is a translation of the TBS article you showed before, where guess what he said? Daisuke hasn't been as inconsistent as Dimitri would lead you to believe. If anything, Dimitri's the inconsistent one. Despite his claims, Dimitri is still actively cherry-picking statements from the devs while hoping that nobody actually checks what he was saying. But here's the thing, it's very difficult to try and check what was actually being said here, because if any of those naysayers did try and read like Dimitri cited, they'd have a hard time doing that as they probably wouldn't be reading the same thing that Dimitri shows. See, while these are the right articles, that's not what they look like on their respective websites. Why is this? Well, Mr. Monroe is using translations of the articles. Translations he doesn't source for some reason, even though during the Pokemon segment, it shows that you're willing to give credit to the translators. Not only are we seeing one of the many inconsistencies within Dimitri's video, we're also seeing that Dimitri is doing some very shady stuff behind the scenes. Dimitri isn't just using 2 different translations of the TBS article, he's using 3. See, this Anne interview might look a little off, like why is the font black instead of red? And that's easy. This isn't the article. This is what the article looks like, and this is what's shown in Dimitri's video. I don't know where he got that one from, probably a Google translated version of the page, as when I tested it, it came out looking very similar to what Dimitri shows. Why even present that there are 2 different interviews? Maybe because using a machine translation translated versions of the dev's words make it much easier to twist and present in different contexts. And that sounds very similar to cherry picking. Dimitri is still cherry picking statements no matter how much he may whine and say that he's not doing it. So let's just make a calendar for any time he decides to take statements out of context, shall we? But this puts into perspective just how bogus the devs are inconsistent claim is when Dimitri has to go through so many hoops to spot any contradictions.
Finally, there's something else I want to address. Dimitri not crediting the translators. It's not only bad because, yeah, you should credit people who actually did the hard work, but this leads to some dire implications. Dimitri constantly claims that it was actually him and his friends who translated these articles, when that's far from the truth. You know, these articles existed for months before Dimitri's video came out, which honestly makes the whole buried history part of his video really funny. Like, nothing was hidden from you, you just didn't care about it until now. But when you combine Dimitri taking all of the credit alongside his lack of sourcing, this goes from Dimitri being dishonest to Dimitri committing content theft, at least of some sorts. His translation efforts were very minimal, yet he's making it seem like he did all the work. In a segment discussing how awful it is that someone's hard work can be taken and disrespected, it's beyond hypocritical of you to turn around and do the same thing. I hope you like the word hypocrisy. It's going to show up a lot as we go on.
Bridget's story this go-around starts off with a far more self-conscious Bridget, questioning how they are living their life. This conundrum ends in two different ways. Unlike past games, characters in Strive don't have multiple endings, with much variance. Instead, the earlier endings, resulting from failure, see the characters' arcs ending preemptively, often leaving them feeling incomplete, or contrasting a true conclusion. Some would even compare these early ends to that of a bad ending.
But there are no bad endings, and you should know this. The dev backlog you brought up earlier, right after the devs clarified Bridget's gender, they did explain that all of the endings are canon and that there are no bad endings. You never even acknowledged this despite referencing the backyard article, and I can't help but question this. You constantly go on and on about how the devs are gaslighting people, and this should be more proof. They say that there are no bad endings, yet even before Bridget, that would have been provably false, but you're strangely quiet about that. Guys, did Dimitri intentionally leave that statement out so he could lie that the devs always intended for there to be a bad ending? Sounds a lot like a certain something.
In Bridget's case, in this vulnerable state, the character would meet GoldLewis early on, an in-universe vet with potential ties to an agency that has previously in Guilty Gear lore described Bridget's unique situation as something that can be used to manipulate him. Keep that in mind. Whereupon meeting him in the game, Lewis immediately refers to Bridget as a girl, and continues to do so throughout the coming story mode, accidentally. Upon losing later fights in this mode, GoldLewis will jump in directly to assist both the player and Bridget, ultimately leading to the character coming to the conclusion that they're a girl now.
What in the heck are you yapping about? Lots to talk about here, folks. So let's talk about that agency. The mysterious agency featured in X2 is the Post-War Administration Bureau, or the PWAB. The PWAB is a secret agency that monitors threats. GoldLewis doesn't belong to that agency. You admitted it. He's a Fed. He's a United States federal agent. GoldLewis is simply the Secretary of Defense. Absolute defense. While GoldLewis has lines relating to monitoring potential threats, unlike the PWAB, it's never for any secretive reasons like a hidden plan for future manipulation, only for those he thinks will harm the great USA, baby. But now I'm confused here. How did you get the US military and the PWAB confused? Guilty Gear is very anal when it comes to dealing with who works with who. For instance, Dizzy was a part of the May Ship Pirates and then became part of Illyrian royalty. Strive mentions this and does this for many of the cast. Take Soul, who worked with the Holy Order and then became a bounty hunter. So if GoldLewis worked with the PWAB, it would have been mentioned. Yet Dimitri is unable to show any proof of that. Well, if GoldLewis didn't work with the PWAB, did the US government at least work with them? No, they've never worked together, and unlike the PWAB, which is portrayed as being very manipulative and secretive, US military haven't. In fact, we've seen them help the cast at multiple times. Like in Strive, Vernon helped Soul. So unless you have proof that says otherwise, this is just a blatant lie. In fact, I think we need more proof. Let's actually look at what the PWAB said about Bridget, so it contains some info that'll really show that Groomer GoldLewis is really stupid. Normally, we would not have been bothered with such a simple bounty hunter. However, this one bears mention because of his multimillionaire father and the fact that he is currently searching for a Commander Gear. While Commander Gear Dizzy is thought to be dead, this account has certain flaws which we have pointed out in a previous report. Any information on the fate of Dizzy that the subject may contain could be indispensable. Due to an issue involving twins, the subject, a man, was raised as a woman by his family. He could be brought to our side via relatives. Using a yo-yo as his weapon, he has a fair skills as a bounty hunter, nothing worthy of special mention. This threat is minimal. And in Accent Core, This individual was a bounty hunter for a time and possesses such an insignificant threat that he is barely worth mentioning on this list. Nevertheless, we're mentioning him due to the fact that he's from a very wealthy family, and though he tries to hide it, he is searching for a command-type gear. Although Dizzy's death, the command-type gear mentioned above has been reported and confirmed. This individual seems to be of the opinion that she is still alive. This could lead to a serious complication if he knows Dizzy's whereabouts. This individual was raised as a girl, although he is actually a boy, due to a superstition concerning twins. We may be able to use this unique upbringing to our advantage should we wish to control him. He has mastered a unique fighting style that utilizes a yo-yo, is a reasonably accomplished bounty hunter, but doesn't give much merit in this report. We give this individual a risk rating of D. These PWAB never cared that much about Bridget, only that she knows who Dizzy is and has a rich family. She is one of the lowest ranked characters in X2, titled with only RoboKai, a joke character. But for the sake of the argument, let's assume that GoldLewis is a member of the PWAB. Him being a member wouldn't matter, as at the end of Exer, the PWAB was placed under the lead of Milia Rage. She's a lot nicer than the previous group, relatively speaking, and she changed the organization from being a shady bunch that they've been in the past, aka they aren't monitoring people anymore, at least for as nefarious reasons. We even see this in the story mode. Milia and Zato are helping Illyria, so in a way, Kai is more related to the PWAB than GoldLewis, and by Dimitri's logic, that would mean that Kai has more incentive to groom Bridget. But assuming that GoldLewis is a member of the PWAB, he wouldn't share any of the previous beliefs that the old PWAB had, meaning he has no reason to want to try and control Bridget, unless you're implying that GoldLewis is a traitor and wants to restore the old PWAB, but again, you have no proof of that. You know, I'm starting to see why you cut out so much now. Your theory is the reason why the term crack theory exists. Bridget is quite literally one of the last people the PWAB would try and use, yet you're arguing that they think Bridget is so important that they try and control her. Unless you can prove that something else happened like that, this is all just BS, that you're pushing for no reason. Well, there is a reason. This is all done to try and push that Groom Lewis Diddleson narrative that Dimitri has a hard-on for. Like, both this and his first video constantly push GoldLewis as a groomer. Is this an example of the writer's poorly hidden fetish? The real reason why GoldLewis calls Bridget a girl initially is because he didn't know that much about her. The flawless route, GoldLewis says that Bridget's reputation isn't just for show, implying that he really doesn't know that much about her. Him believing that Roger is an alien didn't convince you. Heck, the whole reason they fight in the first place is because GoldLewis was way more interested in Roger than Bridget. Also, the whole GoldLewis constantly refers to Bridget as a girl thing is more of Dimitri being dishonest, though in this case a dishonest editor. He only calls her a girl twice in the footage Dimitri shows. Once in stage 1 and then again in stage 8 where he corrects himself after doing so. This is being framed as more malicious than it actually is when it's just a slip up. If being a groomer is tripping over your words, then multiple members of the Guilty Gear world are groomers, once again including Kai, who you later argue is one who actually cares for Bridget. Oh fun. Let's actually talk about GoldLewis as a character for a second. Dimitri's portrayal of GoldLewis as being this shady character shows a massive understanding of the character. In his arcade mode, GoldLewis tries to stop Giovanna, her Gio, his associate, from fighting Nagoriyuki. The end of the arcade mode has GoldLewis admit that while his mission was to recruit Nago, he was willing to disobey it and promises Nago that nothing bad will ever happen to him. Heck, he even says that he'll personally help Nago if he falls on hard times. Does this seem like the type of guy who blindly followed his overlord's orders to manipulate someone he's never met to do some random thing? No, not at all. Spoiler alert, but Dimitri goes on to argue that most of the stuff with GoldLewis is from a bad ending. And wouldn't GoldLewis acting so out of character give more credibility to the idea of this being a bad ending? Yet Dimitri acts like this is how GoldLewis acts, and that's just a lie. The silver lining in all this does show that, for starters, anyone to call GoldLewis a groomer hasn't played Strive, to nobody's surprise. It also shows that Dimitri has quite the poor grasp on Strive's writing in his characters. Remember, one of her claims is that the writers totally meant for this stuff to be vague, and other stuff that relies on your understanding of the story. That's terrifying, and totally won't make the next section incredibly frustrating.
Alternatively, if you win all of the fights in the story mode, the ending has Bridget with Kai where he gives a speech stating that you shouldn't change for anybody, no matter what others think or the expectations put on you. Whereas Bridget in response, instead of asserting themselves as a woman, will then state they will be themselves, no matter what others' expectations are going forward. This immediately gives a gander into why there was so much confusion upon the DLC's release, and how exactly the writers of Strive went about the initial intention of making the character ambiguous. As stated, the try again round for many characters sees things unfinished. There are even examples like Axel's, where he literally runs off, leaving the story incomplete, as well as other examples like with Baiken's, where she meets Nagoriyuki for the first time, and he flees in fear. However, in the successful version of this event, she manages to stop him from fleeing, ultimately resulting in her arc reaching its conclusion, having found what she was
Okay, let's do this. Let's start at the try again route. To quote from the devs again, there are no bad endings. Everything is canon, or to be more accurate, the main story is the same, but each route explores the themes and concepts in a different way, building upon some of the ideas introduced. Let's explore this using your examples, Axel and Baiken. Let's highlight the arcade mode runs and compare the info in first versions, try and spot any contradictions, or the story being incomplete, or anything else that could signify a bad ending, okay? Before we begin though, I do want to address some stuff. First, earlier when Dimitri introduced Strive's arcade mode, he said that there were only 2 endings, and that's right, but also wrong. There are actually 3 endings. Dimitri even shows the 3rd ending and uses it for Baiken's example, but he never acknowledges that. The second and more pressing issue is Dimitri's sourcing is bad too. See, most of the footage that Dimitri uses comes from the YouTuber Too Cutesy. He is never credited for that, and it's even worse here as Dimitri's able to bring up other YouTubers later and credits him. Let's just add it to the ever-growing list of inconsistencies with this video, I guess. But let's go over that arcade mode. Starting with Axel. Axel runs into Geo, she asks him for directions, and a fight happens. I'll read each route by calling the single heart loss version the lost version. This is a route that occurs if you lose both stage 1 and stage 7 fights. In the lost version, Geo doesn't get the directions but states that she doesn't need them and she'll find out on her own. In the flawless version, Geo says that she knew Axel wouldn't give her the right directions and that she's got her own way of finding the directions. The outcome of both fights is Geo realizing that the fight was worthless. No contradictions here. Let's continue. In the lost version stage 7, Geo says that she can get a read on other people but not Axel, knowing that he's different. After that, she leaves saying that she'll only use her nose to find Nago. The flawless version, Geo finds out why Axel wanted to meet Nago, to turn him back into a human. Axel says he's not looking to start trouble and runs away. I like to point out that in the flawless version, Axel calls Giovanna a mind reader, the very same thing he implies in the lost version. Furthering this, in the flawless intro to stage 7, Geo realizes that Axel is intentionally not telling her the directions, something she realized in the lost version of stage 1. Again, the non-canon route is sharing the exact same info as the canon route. The unfulfilled route sure is fulfilling the player with the right info. Also, I'd like to take this time to point out that Dimitri never acknowledges that there is a stage 7, at all. I get that he didn't cover all the stages where X2 with Bridget, only the endings, but here's the thing. For the most part, most of the non-ending stages don't contain too much relevant info. Like, in stage 1, Bridget calls Baiken a funny name, Baiken gets upset, a fight happens. Next stage, Bridget calls Anji a funny name, Anji gets upset, and a fight happens. There's nothing really important during these fights, but Strive is different. Strive only has cutscenes or interactions for 3 fights. Stage 1, 7, and the ending. Again, one of the main points Dimitri hammers in is that the writing was intentionally vague. How can you, in good faith, claim that the writing is vague while ignoring 1/3 of it? It's like complaining that a book was boring while only reading the first and last 5 pages. Actually, while talking about good faith arguments, I could argue that the way Dimitri presents Strive's arcade mode is genuinely bad. Earlier, he admits that Strive has a different writing style compared to previous games. Well, if both games have different writing styles, then why compare them in the same way? Like, obviously both games are going to do things in a way that suits each's writing style. While it wouldn't be bad to compare their writing in context of which one you personally like more, we're trying to personally compare their writing to figure out vagueness. Completely ignoring how one game writes is just genuinely not fair critique. And for someone who constantly argues that Strive's not cherry picking or middling info, you very much are. Anyways, back to England. The double heart loss stage 8, Axel runs into Nago and it's revealed Giovanna was tailing him. The stage ends with Nago leaving and neither reaching a conclusion with Axel, asking if this even counts as an ending. Now, I know what someone's about to say, doesn't this prove that they're bad endings? Well, that's because Axel's requires a bit more context. Let's go to Geo's arcade mode for a sec, as this shows the same scenario but for her perspective. Intro similar, what's direction and all that, but what I really want to bring attention to is her double heart loss. In that route, Nago leaves with neither being able to answer, but Geo does want to say this little line.
You really think I'm here to neutralize a samurai?
You know.
She didn't want to fight Nago, and in later runs she says the following.
You intend to save me.
Good. Glad it got through to you.
Without getting the answer, she still wanted to help Nago, showing no contradictions. Her stage 8 heart loss has actually mentioning that his plan is to turn Nago back to human, but he knows Nago's answers. The reason he knows this is, going back to Axel's arcade mode, in his stage 8 heart loss, Geo gives up on her goal and he gets to ask Nago's question. While Dimitri claims it is Axel running away, my reasoning as to what actually happened here is that Axel goes back in time and to better understand Geo's reasoning and make sure that both of them get their right answer. Dialogue like the following.
Look, I get that you're worried, but I think we're after the same thing here.
I think you're right. Sorry I got you so wrong. Guess this is what it means to communicate through battle.
Implies that something like that happened, with Axel being less hesitant around Geo. So Axel's double heart loss ending is intentional, I'd say, most certainly not the rule. Further to support this, in Geo's double heart loss, she misses just how much she wanted to save Nago and fight him, and Axel just ruined it for her. What happens in Geo's flawless run? She admits that she didn't want to fight Nago and wants to help him. The story is still the same, just expressed differently, and oh my god. Anyway, let's go to Axel's single heart loss. He gets to ask his question, if Nago would like to be human, but I actually like to play the part Dimitri Dimitri cut out.
I wanted to ask, you had a chance to become human again. Would you take it?
Is that even possible?
Let's just say I know a guy. Try to remember that for now.
If I could undo it all, then I would.
Now, as for that chat, have you ever considered becoming a human?
I don't bother considering the impossible.
In both this and in the Stage 8 loss, Axel asks the same thing, and Naga responds with wanting to become human but having past regrets. Once again, the idea of Axel's plan is mentioned in both the loss and flawless version of a stage, which wouldn't make sense for a good ending to verify and builds upon info from a bad ending. Finally, let's go to Stage 9. But before I do, I'd like to point out that once again, Dimitri never shows this or even mentions what happened in Stage 9, even though he shows Baiken in Stage 9. I'd ask why, but the reason will become clear in a bit. After fighting, Axel asks his question and Naga responds like, so.
Only correct the path before me. There's no way to wipe clean the trail of blood I've left behind.
Implying the same desire to undo the past, but instead having to try and live a better life than his past. Throughout all of Axel's arcade belt's routes, the flaws never contradicted or had an ending that was unfulfilled. In both ending, Axel gets to ask his question, and Naga responds that he'd like to try and be a human again, but his past actions make it hard for him to think he's worthy of going back to that. And don't worry, with Baiken, that whole try again argument gets a whole lot worse. So, let's talk boobs. Arcade mode starts with Anji requesting a duel with Baiken. In the lost version, after the fight, Anji knows that something was off, with Baiken responding that her blade is different and isn't for fighting. In Stage 7, they fight and Anji actually says that the fight was fun. Baiken says that it's because he's dense and goes on to further explain her blade. She explains it like so.
They see things they don't want to see and learn things they sure as hell don't want to learn.
It's a far cry from a typical peaceful sword style, but by overcoming the adversity before them, they can affirm themselves, allowing them to realize who it is they're really fighting. In short, your sword is unbeatable.
After the clip, Anji says that he wants to follow Baiken and sees this through. In Double Heart Loss version Stage 8, Baiken and Anji meet Naga. Now this is where I want to point out some very interesting editing decisions from Dimitri. Dimitri claims that Naga was too afraid to fight Baiken and ran away in the Stage 9 ending they fought. This isn't true. In the Double Heart Loss version, Baiken does fight Naga, and after their fight, Naga realizes that Baiken has a special power and leaves to train more. That's what happens right at the end of Stage 9.
To have met you.
He leaves, but I thought he would find the bad ending. Spoiler alert, but Naga being afraid of Baiken and leaving is a constant throughout the arcade mode. Finishing this up, Baiken and Anji talk about how Naga is probably going to do more self-reflection as a result of Baiken's blade. And let's think about this info for a second. Naga goes out to self-reflect right after encountering a blade that we just heard causes people to see and learn things about themselves that they don't want to see. Could he have seen something that he didn't want to see and want to work on it? This doesn't sound like an unfulfilled ending, yet it's following up with something we heard constantly throughout the lost version of the stage, and even explains why Anji wanted Baiken to beat Naga. Anyways, let's head to the single Heart Loss version of Stage 8. For the fight, Naga immediately notes that something is off about Baiken, almost as if he's afraid of her, but he fights regardless. After the fight, Naga realizes what was off about Baiken. It's her blade. Baiken reveals something new about her blade. A kid taught her how to use it. Naga laughs at that and leaves, but not before saying that he wants to fight her again. Like the Double Heart Loss version, we see that Naga realized that Baiken is stronger than him and that her blade is the reason why. No contradictions, just building upon that same theme. Flawless version time. Following Stage 1, mostly the same as before, except Anji notes that Baiken really wants to use her new blade. The intro to Stage 7, we revisit the idea of why Anji wasn't affected by her blade. Baiken's blade now cuts people free, and Anji is already a free spirit, something alluded to in the Lost version. Once again, info from that bad ending isn't really contradicted, but supported by the good ending. And don't worry, there's more of that, as Baiken realizes his power was due to living with a certain little girl, or a child. The same child that taught Baiken her power back in the single Heart Loss route. Again, if this bad ending is supposed to be where many of the cast don't reach their proper conclusion, they seem to be experiencing nearly the exact same scenario, learning the same things in each route. This makes sense if all the enemies are canon, but makes zero sense if they're bad endings. In Stage 8, Baiken introduces herself as
The one who will cut you free.
And in that version, Naga mentions being afraid of Baiken, like in every other ending. This time, Baiken reveals that he's not afraid of her, and odds on that he's afraid of himself. Stage 9. After the battle, Naga says that fighting Baiken is more like trying to fight himself. This literally references the same idea of the Lost version introduced. Baiken's power makes her more of a mirror of the opponent. The arcade mode ends with Naga leaving after saying that he wants to fight Baiken again, aka he leaves in fear. You know, I'm starting to see why Dimitri didn't play this out in full. So after laying all that out, is there really a try again route for Axel? Info like Geo possessing a sixth sensibility, Axel's main goal being to ask if Naga wanted to be human again. Naga even calls Axel a child of God in a single Heart Loss route. In Stage 9, he calls Axel's power godlike streamlined. The info may be delivered in a slightly different way, but nothing in the Flawless route contradicts the other routes in a major way. And you even see this more with Baiken. The only big difference that in the Lost version, the power really isn't given a name. In the Flawless version, the power is identified as being enlightenment. Naga loses in all versions of the fight and runs away due to a similar reason. Baiken has evolved into a new power that he needs time to beat, and the power is always related to being something of a reflection of the character, not Baiken. While I'd like to argue that this proves that Dimitri doesn't understand Strive's writing their characters, that wouldn't be 100% true. Or like 99%. Dimitri wouldn't have edited the arcade modes like that if he didn't, on some level, understand that the endings couldn't be grouped together into a binary descriptor of good or bad. There's something deeper going on here, and Dimitri couldn't have that. Otherwise, it might have made him look very hypocritical when he just got on others for not recognizing the same thing with pre-Strive Bridget. It also shows that the JP audience, who Dimitri constantly argues are the ones who truly understand the character, might not have fully understood every part of the character and could be wrong. Either way, Dimitri's cherry picking it, but he haven't got to Bridget yet. Help me.
Looking for. So in Bridget's case, it creates a perfect contrast where losing sees them just agreeing with the person making assertions of their identity throughout the story. And then the true route, where they decide to live as themselves.
Then we on all that, let's hit this argument on the head. First is Kai telling Bridget to live as her true self. This doesn't refer to her being a boy. Straight up. Dimitri is once again cutting context, revealing Bridget's true self is the main purpose of her story. Both versions of Stage 7, Bridget meets GoldLewis again. GoldLewis knows that Bridget is hiding her true self, and that by doing that, she'll only cause more trouble for both herself and others. Already, the argument that this was going to be ambiguous is starting to crumble apart. What true self would Bridget need to hide if she was a boy? Nobody believes that she's a girl anymore. Later dialogue has her admit that she's doing well, has made lots of money, so we can at least assume that her village and parents don't think that, and also that everybody that she cares about also knows her as a boy and aren't trying to change that, so there's no outside pressure either. But if Bridget wants to be a girl, then a lot of these ideas start to make sense. She'd be hiding these feelings to not trouble her family and make them worry. This is shown by an extension in the Flawless version of Stage 7, where GoldLewis, after saying that he relates to what Bridget is going through, brings up this.
Hey, I know what it's like to turn your back on yourself for too long. I'm still telling myself it ain't my fault as we speak. You know how long it's been since I saw my family?
He hid his feelings, and that caused a rift between him and his family, building to him not seeing them that much, something that Bridget fears happening. Now on to Kai. Something you don't bring up is that Kai agrees with GoldLewis in all of Stage 8's endings. If Kai is against Bridget being a boy, then why would he suddenly agree with the person saying the opposite? I know I keep hammering in that whole all indies are canon thing, but it's very sus that Dimitri didn't bring up Bridget's double heart loss at all. See, Bridget only explicitly admits to being a girl in a single heart loss route. You would think that that means there's more proof with the writing being vague, but it's actually the opposite. If Dimitri wanted to acknowledge the double heart loss route, he would have to acknowledge that there's a semblance of canonicity throughout the arcade modes, and saying that previously used Baiken's double heart loss route has been proof that there is a bad ending, he would then suddenly have to claim the opposite. And also, just in case someone tries to use the double heart loss version of proof with writing being vague, going back to the quote she said at the end here, the stage leading up to this has Bridget express a desire to have Kai's strength, something echoed in the Lost versions just to further show that everything is canon. Kai's strength here is the fact that he both went public about his relationship with Gears, that he's now part Gear. Since Dimitri was a big Gears fan and knows all of the lore, I shouldn't have to say this, but the public hates Gears due to their actions in the war, that same war that led to Kai becoming a king due to his heroics. We're even shown that there's still some distrust about Gears and Testament's arcade mode, where Chip questions Testament's sudden appearance due to them being a Gear. People would surely be confused to see the guy who hated Gears and fought against them suddenly love them and even become one. Kai became the thing he once fought for and is now doing fine, and Bridget is jealous of that and wishes she could do the same thing. Now, I wonder what Bridget fought against in the past that's now starting to become something she wants. Let's play what comes before Kai's speech here.
I mean, I'm impressed. I wish I could be like you.
This shows the real reason why Bridget accepted Kai's words. If the story was about Bridget wanting to become a boy, then why would she constantly be shocked and envious of someone who completely changed who they were and became the very thing that they hated? According to you, Bridget didn't hate being a boy, but these feelings really shouldn't exist. Bridget didn't become the thing she hated, she wanted to be a boy. I think this makes it crystal clear what the dev's message was. Bridget is a girl. The other lines of dialogue in arcade mode all have characters tell Bridget that it's fine to change. Her becoming her true self is Kai reassuring her that it's fine to change and live as a girl, as the true self is the actions you've taken and that you uphold, not the label you stuck on yourself. Funny how the story is only vague and ambiguous if you actively choose to ignore like 90% of it. As a Kingdom Hearts fan, I'm getting a sense of deja vu, or accurately, PTSD from people spending more time and effort playing the story that makes no sense than actually playing the games and understanding the story. Huh? Oh, Dimitri's a Cage fan? I've never heard a phrase more terrifying than that.
Therein still lies my main issue with this story, however. I mentioned many times that one of the reasons I like this character so much was their personality, as I'm a man that loves contrast. So having a cutesy character possess a smug or uncaring side really gels with me. Previously, we saw Bridget going in the complete opposite direction, where he would correct others who viewed him as a woman, wanting to distance himself from the female identity placed on him, and instead, building his own. With some examples we have yet to mention, like him asking Baiken to help him becoming unladylike, given the character's brutish personality. However, the new iteration we're seeing in Strive just stands in complete contrast to the personality that was present only a few months ago in-universe. Strive making Bridget sheepish, unconfident, and yet weirdly vain at times, going from not caring what others thought in previous games to "tee call me cute" type lines filling their dialogue. In a similar manner to how they said the character has traits like an Adam's apple or broad shoulders, so much of the personality feels copy-pasted from a Google search.
This is where Dimitri's butchered retelling of the story really shows. I hate to sound like a broken record here, but that is the point. Bridget acting unsure of herself is meant to be a clear sign to the viewer that something's troubling her. The scene you're showing is her questioning what really makes her happy now that she's free from the village. Something you seem to forget about is Bridget's second ending in Accent Core. The happy and more smug Bridget we've seen is now more quiet and somber because something bad happened to her family. In Strive, Bridget's biggest fear in the arcade mode is something bad happening to her family, whether it be the constant lying she's doing to them or the fear that she just might drift away from them. You've shown that the last time she was faced with losing her family, Bridget changed how she carried herself, literally.
As well. As you initially heard, when referring to himself, Bridget would often use the more feminine form, Uchi, but in this instance, he corrects himself by switching to the masculine Boku. There could be a few reasons for this, from simply using it to emphasize his commitment to signaling a greater change in the character.
It was peak fiction there. Now when it's the literal main plot point that Bridget is worried that she might lose her family, thus causing her to change how she acts, it's now terrible copy-paste garbage. The people who did a Google search, they surprisingly have a better understanding of the character and her actions than Bridget's #1 glazer over here. They're also massively over-exaggerating the whole cute thing. Looking at the full quotes, we can see that there are 2 whole lines where she mentions being cute. The others either have her being violent or linked to her job as an entertainer, something that she referenced way more in XX. She even has lines that allude to the smug side you oh so love. While Strive definitely goes a bit heavy on the generic quotes, there still is enough to show that her personality isn't a complete 180 as you're making it out to be.
Now their in-game bio mentions that they hate items like mushrooms and other such phallic objects. Because get it? It vaguely looks like male genitalia, so of course it would make them feel uncomfortable. They're a girl now. Google said trans women don't like their genitalia.
See, this point is weird because technically Dimitri's right. Her dislikes are related to her being trans, but the way it's actually handled is a lot more respectful than what Dimitri's claiming. Dimitri, can you point out where in Strive where it's shown that Bridget actively hates those items specifically because they remind her of her little bad guy? Actually, only 2 of the items here are phallic, and unless you explain why bitter herbs or insects make her think of I think you're once again over-exaggerating. To find the answer to this burning question, we have to look at Strive's character themes because unlike previous games, all of them are lyrical and relate to the character. In Bridget's theme, The Town Inside Me, it's a recurring trend of Bridget just about to reach why she feels a certain way about herself for abruptly blaming it on something else.
Haze for a long time though. I never found out what it was. I taste like vegetables I don't like.
The song itself, it actually stops a beat or is said in a way that's very whispery, almost as if the character doesn't actively believe that, which further shows that Bridget is just blaming whatever she's thinking of at the moment. Like before, her dislike seeming random or arbitrary is the point. It's meant to show that Bridget is trying so hard to avoid what's actually causing her trouble that she'd rather blame random objects and confront her feelings. Funnily enough, Bridget isn't the first character to do this in Strive. Testament also had something change from their previous entries. In Testament's case though, it's their hobbies. This is actually brought up in their story mode. Testament's entire story is that they're finally enjoying life and letting go of their hatred, and it shows in this sheer amount of new hobbies they have. So again, I really have to question how familiar is Dimitri with Strive's storytelling, because it seems like he doesn't know much of anything outside of it, even from a very, very surface level. That or he's lying, but I shouldn't have to bring up Bridget's theme to explain this. See, in your previous video, you brought up her theme and said the following.
Up to this point, and can even be further heard in his theme song, with the ending lines. This matches what he learns from Kai. It's as if the lyrics progress along with the story.
You heard all of these metaphors and argued that they were proof of her being a boy. You even said that lyrics progressed with her story, so at some point you believe that these dislikes didn't prove that Bridget was trans, but now you don't. You never acknowledged his previous viewpoint, and again, can't help but wonder why. It could support your argument that the writing was intentionally vague. But here's the kicker, you'd have to show proof that is meant to be seen in a trans light, and you don't have any proof of that, though this does prove something. It proves that you're very competent or very shady. Or not, because I can prove both. See, when discussing Bridget in the past, he has no problem bringing up things like joke endings or outside media like manga, to further analyze the character. But when discussing the character in Strive, now he suddenly doesn't want to do that, for some reason. I compare when Dimitri shows the joke ending from the previous games when he discussed the bad endings. Dimitri shows that there's still a lot more going on than just being a funny joke, that the endings can still feature vital character moments. Yet when discussing Strive, you just show any outside media or discuss any characterization, despite showing that in Guilty Gear, there's something worth analyzing in all of the media and all of the other stuff, and that's not even getting anything else with the theme song. If this is the clearest case of him cherry picking and manipulating the info, then just keep watching, I guess.
And that's where I've decided to stop this. So this video ended up being pretty long, and thanks to my laptop being kinda crap, I've decided to split this thing up into 2 parts. Part 2 will be coming, and I promise that it won't take 100 years. Somewhat. I've been Blades, and until next time.